Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd is a certified financial planner practitioner and senior vice president and financial advisor at Wealth Enhancement Group, one of the nation's largest registered investment advisors. We call it Something More because we'd like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients on Cape Cod and across the country. Here's your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here for another segment of Something More with Chris Boyd. I'm here with Jeff Perry and Brian Regan. We are all of the AMR team at Wealth Enhancement. Glad to have you joining us for another episode. We have a variety of things to talk about, and where I want to begin is an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. September 13th, I guess it was provided. And the title is On the Fence About Spending Decision? Try the 0.01% rule. Well, we hear about all these rules, huh, Jeff?
There's no shortage of rules.
The 5% rule, 4% rule, the rule of 55. I got all these rules. I don't know where to begin, right? So now we got another rule, the 0.01% rule. Did you happen to read this article?
I read it and I mentioned to my wife, and she said that doesn't sound like enough.
Well, do you want to elaborate what what the gist of this was? This rule?
It's about setting a spending limit, basically, right? Out of your cash flow to help guide you to make decisions. And I don't know.
Don't necessarily have to be elaborately deliberative, but if it's under a certain amount, and if I am correct, the amount was 0.01% of your investments, is I think the way it was expressed. And so I started thinking about that, and I was like,
broad definition.
Honey, let's go out to dinner tonight. And she's like, oh, we just went out last night. I'm like, but it would be less than 0.01% of, this kind of thing, and so when you're thinking about how to do it, it could be slippery slope, You're like making permission for yourself on things you care to do just because you want to, without maybe a little bit of discipline.
It reminded me of the Dave Ramsey burn it in my on my dining room table rule, and that's more about big decisions for him, not just spending. But people will ask him, call into a show or whatever, and say, I want to buy this car, and he'll go through their net worth, their debts, and whatever, and they'll say, I want to buy this old car, it's $50,000, and Dave will say, if you burnt that money on your kitchen table, would it make a difference to your financial plan? And well, if the answer,
need a new house if you burn that.
I know. You get the point.
I totally get it. I'm teasing.
If the answer is no, it doesn't matter. Then go ahead and do it. If you're, in his case, debt free and have your retirement plan set up, and so it's context matters, right? It's not just.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Brian, you read this article as well, right?
Well, I'm very familiar with Nick Majuli and the Ritholtz Wealth team because I listen to their podcast. So, I'm familiar with the rule because I heard it through, those avenues, and I saw that it was written up in the Wall Street Journal. And my first thought was, hey, good for him. He's going to sell a lot of books, a lot of great exposure.
Yeah, that's true.
Generally, I like the idea that he's going for, and I think that idea is like, you don't always have to be a tightwad. You can loosen up and get comfortable at some point. I think a lot of people spend their whole life saving and have that mindset, and then they'll get in a situation and their wife won't let them go out to dinner back-to-back nights. Even if they have the means to do it. So from that standpoint, I think it's interesting, and maybe if it lets people enjoy life a little bit, bravo. One of the things that I was thinking was, my net worth and my available liquidity are two completely different numbers. And my available liquidity is much, much smaller than my net worth. So, would this rule apply to 0.01% of my, available liquidity, or 0.01% of my net worth? because if it's 0.01% of my net worth, then I shouldn't have any heart palpitations about, my daughter's birthday party this weekend.
Right.
But the reality is, with 35 people coming, it's going to be very, very expensive, no matter how you look at it. So, that would be my question if Nick was here, that I would ask him. What does he really mean by that? And I'm sure there would be some kind of caveat. I think he has mentioned, I've heard elsewhere saying that maybe you should take out your primary residence. But still,
well, your point is a good one. If you're really thinking about it, some people have investments that have very minimal access. And, so if you can't really access that wealth, house is a good example, but, there's lots of different kinds of investments that don't give you potential access to either to sell it or to generate cash flow from it. So if that's the case, maybe there's a good case for reconsideration of how do I go about that calculation of how much is inconsequential.
Yeah. So, I can't pay for dinner. It's my wife's birthday this weekend too. So I get my daughter and my wife back to back, right? It's going to be expensive
I feel
weekend.
bad for your wife. I hope you're not going to hold that against her when it comes to her birthday present.
Oh, my wife's going to do just fine.
Excellent.
But yeah. So when
a birthday party, there's no getting around that.
No, she deserves one too. 0.01% of, I can't pay for the birthday parties with my house, either one. I can't pay with it with my 401k. I can't pay with it with my IRA. I can't reasonably pay for it with my Roth IRA. I can't reasonably pay for it from my 529. I don't want to pay from it from my brokerage account. I can't pay for it with my HSA. So is it 0.01% of what's in my checking account? Or, you reasonably, all these things are not, all liquidity is not the same. So, I think this rule needs, it needs a lot of caveats and footnotes, I guess, even though
I think it's about having a personal rule for your own situation, right? Because some people are, Chris, we run into clients all the time, and you laugh when I say this word, but sometimes some of them need permission, right?
They have all the time, Jeff. I talk about this with people routinely. That notion of that you talk about, the financial plan can give you permission,
right? And these are people with liquidity. These are people with cash flow. Not everything Brian said is valid, but these are people who, no matter what formula they use, they're okay.
I think ultimately, Jeff, that's the people who this rule is for.
Yeah.
The people who have the money, have the liquidity, but struggle to actually spend the money that they've spent their life saving for. I think in that sense, this is an excellent rule.
Right. Right. And however you come up with that rule, if it's a budget, if it's a formula, if it's, whatever it is, you should enjoy the effort that you put into having a great financial plan, and all those early years when you didn't have liquidity and didn't have cash flow, and you were just working to make ends meet, and you did the hard work, and you reached to your ultimate financial plan, your critical mass, whatever terms we want to use. Geez, find a way to enjoy it, giving it away, spending it, traveling, whatever it is.
Well, I think it's a good point. And we often talk about some of these rules of thumb, which are just that. They're not necessarily hard and fast to everyone's unique circumstances. But I think that was a good clarification about, what should we be thinking about? It might be different for different stages of life and different access to aspects of wealth. And that kind of brings us to thinking about, Brian, you were talking about all these different issues that it might be different for one stage of life from another. Someone who is in your case, well before access to your retirement accounts, you face different circumstances than, say, Jeff, or I'm getting close, Jeff. I'm 6 months away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm definitely at my closer to spending age, right?
And you have access to that money if you want it.
I do. I'm over 59 and a half. So
generationally, there are different kinds of issues. And you had a recent article that kind of fed into this topic. Maybe you want to set that up, Brian.
Yeah, I think it's related, and it's built off another Wall Street Journal article, and the Wall Street Journal article was called "Americans Lose Faith That Hard Work Leads to Economic Gains," and it's based on a survey that shows that only 25% of Americans believe that they can raise their standard of living. And I thought that was very depressing. So I looked back at some historical data. And I tried to say, hey, look, what is actually doing this? This has been a conversation for years now. It's been a trend going for years. I mean, the data on the survey goes back, I believe, to the 80s, and this is the worst it's ever been. And I made my attempt at trying to figure out, what's causing this. And I made the caveat at the beginning because of the fact that I'm of the millennial generation, because I do think a lot of these sentiment conversations come down to what part of life you're in. People who are my mother, who is retired, she is less concerned about the cost of college education than she is about the cost of her trip to Vietnam. Those are, she's just in a different stage of life. So I thought that was illustrative of pointing out why maybe these things are to the top of my head. I'm trying to reveal my bias. But when you think about it, I put in this article 20 years of data, and it's a compounding effect. And when you guys were my age, I'm sure if I looked back at 40 years of data, it would have been a compounding effect that led to a similar situation or a similar feeling when you were around 40 years old with kids as well. So I think one of Chris's reactions when he first read this is, I felt similarly when I was
Right.
younger, and my reaction was, I don't doubt that you did. That's the kind of the point that I'm putting out here. These are compounding effects. And basically what I did was I looked at the CPI. I looked at the CPI over the last 20 years. I could have done it the last 40 years and made it more relevant to more people, I'm sure, but I think the story would have been the same. And I said, hey, look, the target inflation is 2%. The actual inflation that we're seeing right now is 2.9%. But these three categories, which are big categories for happiness in life, are growing at well beyond the target and the headline inflation. And those three categories were shelter, education, and healthcare. So let's talk about shelter first. Because it's been more dramatic over the last 5 years since the post-pandemic. And that's been growing at nearly 5% annual compounded rate for the last 5 years, which is substantial. Most people have not kept up; their wages have not kept up with that amount. In the lower end, you've actually done slightly better. In the higher end, the higher 50%, you've done slightly worse. So that's a problem, right? And the longer these problems last, the bigger and bigger the exasperation of the problem gets. Now, looking at wages isn't even like a good way of assessing shelter, right? Because the biggest deterrent to buying a home is the down payment. So a lot of people need to be part of what I call the capital class, meaning they already have to have investments, or they have to have help from family members. 25% of people who buy their first home, according to the National Association of Realtors, or maybe that one was Redfin, I don't remember correctly, get help from mom and dad. And the average first-time home buyer is 56. Average first-time home buyer is 38 years old, and the average home buyer is 56 years old. So that seems pretty old to me, and it is historically old for a first-time home buyer and for the average home buyer. So there's obviously a problem here, and it's getting exasperated. Yeah. Now, even if you're renting, oftentimes, at least here in Boston, you need first, last, and security deposit. So that's 3 months rent that you need on day one. That can be an onerous tax for a lot of people, and we're not even talking about moving expenses. So that could be a big headwind. So no matter how you look at it, this has been frustrating to people, particularly over the last 5 years. But even if you look over the last 20 years, it's well ahead of headline inflation or target inflation. Finally, I get the sense that a lot of people don't think they could start a family without owning a home. And whether that's right or wrong, I do think that's a cultural perception. So if people are banking their standard of living or their happiness into the ability to get married, start a family, start growing a life, at least the vibe is that there's a huge impediment here, that you can't afford it. And I think that's sad. Now, the second part that I want to talk about is education, and the cost of childcare is astronomical. If you didn't experience that, I don't know where you live, because this seems to be the case everywhere. It grows well beyond childcare grows at 3.6% a year for the last 20 years. Again, that's higher than wage growth for the last 20 years. The cost of education, college education, has gone up also by 3.6%. Whether that's coincidence or not, I do not know, but I checked the numbers, and that's the case. They're both 3.6% for the last 20 years. The only sector of the economy that has grown wages faster than 3.6% are people who hold bachelor degrees. So the people with bachelor degrees, their family tree has the ability to afford more bachelor degrees. So I can see how that could be frustrating to people who feel like they can just never get there, or if they do, they have to take an exorbitant amount of student loans, and that they'll be paying off for the foreseeable future. There's tons of data out there that suggests that if you have a college degree, you're more likely to have a job, you're more likely to have higher wages, you're more likely to have a family. So these things, they compound on each other. And finally, healthcare, again, it's growing at a rapid pace. 62% of personal bankruptcies in this country are caused by a healthcare bill. If you can't feel like you can have a good job and have a home and have reasonable health insurance, I could see why it can get frustrating for people and feel like they can't raise their standard of living. So basically, that was what the article was about. Now, tack on to the fact that if you're paying 5 to 10% for student loans and your wages are growing at 3.5%, well, now you're using your all-important minimal liquidity during your formative adult years, where you would like to be saving for a house, saving for your child's education, saving for having children, or paying your health insurance. You can see how that can get sucked up and continue, this frustrating cycle. So that's what the article's about. It's just trying to explain why people might feel this way. And I understand the frustration. We have we have a lot of help for people trying to get to retirement. We have 401k plans and IRAs and Roth IRAs, but a lot of that kind of takes away from your earning years. And I think it's important to save for those retirement years. But we do. When you're working in your formative years, you do have a lot of expenses and a lot of liquidity needs. And I think that can be, again, this compounds, right? The effect of compounding is significant. So the longer this goes unsolved, the more frustrating it's going to be for subsequent generations.
A lot to unpack in that. I think it's challenging because I think, as you said, a lot of times, the initial reaction is, "Hey, we had it tough too."
That's not a good thing, no. Right?
No. I think,
yeah.
And as I think about it, I have a number of reactions. First one is, based on what you just discussed, it is really interesting to think that education begets education, which also suggests wealth begets wealth, right? The idea that if I am coming from a household that has a higher education, I have a higher propensity for getting a higher education. Higher education, whichever generation we're talking about, implies greater opportunity for income and less unemployment. We can see stats about that year after year after year,
Sure.
whether it's in good economies or bad economies. And that's really relevant, and that's part of how that factors into this. I think I relate to my own experience, of course, anecdotal stuff, right? We all internalize this, and I think, well, Yeah, I had family who helped me with a down payment, right? If you don't have that kind of support or the ability of a parent to do that, then that's a disadvantage. You could put that same point to education. So those are valid points, I think. And you probably today you can make that same case about childcare. In our case, Kristen stayed home for years, so that's how we dealt with the costs of childcare. After we had our second child, it was too expensive. We
Mhm.
couldn't afford to have childcare, so it made more sense at the rates we were getting paid in those days, uh, not to have that other income, rather to be home and have the opportunity to raise the children the way we wanted. You know,
Well,
that kind of
the average child care expense in Massachusetts is $22,000 per child. And that's after tax money. Okay. So there should be the expectation, I would say, if you have two children, that most people can't, it doesn't make sense for both parents to continue to work, because you have to assume that both parents make a substantial amount of money, and then they'd just be working just to send
make
their
it
kids
worth it.
elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That was the case with in our situation. It was
Mhm.
like, well, you get to a point where it's like, well, I'd rather be home anyway. I guess we'll have to make it work this way, that kind of thing.
right. And then we live in a society where shelter and education are married to each other, right? Because your property taxes pay for your public schools education as well.
It's true.
So if you can't afford a house in a good school in a good
Yeah,
school
yeah,
district,
which
I
might
mean,
affect tax rates and house values and all the rest of it. Yeah.
so this is all to say, like, when you put these things together and you think about the compounding effect, like that, I think that's the most important thing, is year after year after year, it's going to continue to be hard. And
Yeah.
why do we want it to be so
No,
hard for
it's
people to have families and
I
shelter? It shouldn't
I
be
think
so
the
hard.
difference though is it's hard, but does that mean that there is not the capability or the opportunity for upward mobility? I think your point is a good one. Maybe it's harder than it should be, but and there's certainly equity issues and beyond the scope of what we're going to solve in our conversation, but whether or not education should be tied to the property values in your town and how that's, you know, what how should that be structured, right?
Well, let's think about it this way. Just think about the ways that it can handcuff people, right? We just talked about how if you have two kids, it might make sense under most circumstances for a parent to stay home. That parent, which is historically has been women, are going to be taken out of the workforce for years.
Yeah,
When they go back, are they going to get? Are they going to get?
their wage level. Yep.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time with Social
So
Security and the lost years from 401ks and building their income over, job promotions that they're
Yeah.
sacrificing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
so
Real detriment.
as
Yeah.
we know, women tend to make less than men in the same job, and I think a big part of that, I don't think I know a big part of that is
That is
because
so
of the
true.
lost years in the workforce because
Sure.
of child rearing.
Yeah.
So that's one big reason where upward mobility is hampered, right? Because of one of these reasons. Another one would be, let's talk about health insurance again. Most people are subsidized, in their health insurance is subsidized by their employer,
Mhm.
or at least most white collar
Thankfully.
workers, right? That is not even available from blue collar workers. So you can't take any
Unionized, maybe, not
Yeah,
necessarily.
unionized, certainly.
yeah, but you can't take an interruption in your service. That's not something that's going to be available to most families, because your insurance is so important, right? Um, so, does that limit your opportunity set? Does that limit you from changing careers if you want to? I would say it certainly does, right? If you work in a union job, are you going to stick out that union job just because you know that your family has health insurance, even if it makes you unhappy? Even if you don't see it adding, significant changes to your standard of life, as the survey points out, I would say yes. If you have to spend what I estimate $1.1 million to send my children to college, and you have to put away a substantial amount of your paycheck in your working years uh, to fund that education, well, will that take away from your standard of living? Of course it will. Will it take away from the amount of money that you would have to invest elsewhere? Of course it will. So, as with education expenses rising 4% a year, as I have, for the last decade,
At
you're
some point, that's
significantly
going to
hampered.
change, right? I mean, when does that change?
It has slowed down recently,
Yeah,
which is
and I
good.
think you have demographic components that will
Mhm.
exacerbate that shift, where you'll have some schools going out of business, perhaps, but
Sure.
just the idea that there'll be um, a tighter market, right?
Less customers for the
Yeah,
products, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But there is a fair point that maybe government subsidized funding of college educations has made it uh, accessible in a way that's caused costs to continue to rise when it's being shouldered by students who pay it over, a decade or more, well beyond their probably longer than that after their college education, and at a rate that's more comparable to a mortgage than it is what used to be thought of as how you would pay for education. So that's its own dilemma. How do you deal with this?
Yeah, we see this. We see this with our clients. They come in, and especially the younger clients, like Brian's age and give or take, and they want to do it all, right? You want to do it all. You want to save for retirement. You want to go on all these vacations. You want to save for your college, for your children, and so forth. And you can't do it all. Sometimes it's a matter of prioritizing. Chris, you must remember. I remember the days when you had no money, and then you started to have some money because you were either working two jobs or you were doing well in your profession or whatever the situation. And then you started to be able to save, and you did what you could, and then you build your career, and you start to say, well, what's important to me? Where are my values? So if my values are to provide education for my family through savings so they can go to college, then no, I can't go on a quarterly cruise around the world, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of conflicting things. And sometimes I hear from people, not to be the negative side of this, but you can't have it all. You do have choices to make. Maybe you can't. I think about the first house that I bought was 800 square feet. You see a lot more larger homes and people using leverage a lot more than my memory is. You see cars. There's another thing, Brian. The cost of vehicles is, I don't know what the
Dramatically
inflation
more.
rate, but
Yeah.
in healthcare for sure. And yeah, if you have to stay in the job, if you make the decision that I'm going to stay in this job because it has health insurance for me and my family, and it has a 40-hour a week wage, and it has the potential for promotion, even if I don't love the job, well, that's part of my choices on how I want to raise my family and the values that I want to instill in the people that I care about. So it's about choices, it's about discipline, and it's about having a plan, even when it doesn't seem like the plan's going to work long term.
Yeah. So Jeff, I mean, what I heard is, what you're saying is you agree that it's tough to raise your standard of living, right? You have to make a lot of trade-offs.
I do, and that is
Yeah.
my main point, and it's been every generation. And I'm going back to your original point, maybe not doing a good job about it. If the unhappiness or the happiness quotient, however you want to measure it, if the unhappiness quotient is higher now, I wonder why. Like, it's always been tough. There's always been sacrifices. I wonder why people are less willing to either make those sacrifices or they're more unhappy to make those sacrifices.
In recent years, I think it's very much a housing story. But
Yeah.
because it's accelerated so much more. It's been 5% historically. It's been around 3.1%. But that's a significant leap. That's a 60-70% change in the change of typical prices. You're talking about a 40% change, or 40% change compounded, give or take, over the last 5 years. That's huge. That keeps people out. And it keeps out a whole generation of people that want to increase their standard of living but can't, and then have a jealousy factor if they see someone getting help from mom and dad, or if they do see that somebody that's done well, that's been able to buy a house. I think that's a natural human reaction.
Did you have a bottom line in the article as to as it relates to this, or maybe I think we can certainly take a takeaway that maybe it's an uphill slog, but you really need to do planning. You can't expect to get there without some serious effort. And
so my bottom line is that inflation has been around 2% over the last 20 years, right? There's been periods when it's been a little bit higher. There's been periods when it's been a little bit lower. But the three things that actually really matter to people's happiness or increasing their standard of living has been orders of magnitude higher than 2%, right? We're talking 3.5%, and with shelter more recently, 5%. So, we can measure how much electronics have gone down. When I graduated from college, I think I bought a TV for like $1,100, and I just bought one for $115.
Right.
That's great, right? That gets into the data, that gets into the 2%, but it's a pretty insignificant part of trying to build a life for me and my family, which is ultimately the most important thing. I own 8 TVs. I don't need 8 TVs, right? But my kids do. My kids do need to go to college. I have 8 TVs because they cost $100. They're cheap. We've decreased the cost of things that are nice to have, and the necessities are wildly out of control. And I think that compounding rate of effect has become frustrating for people over time. And that was my bottom line. My wife read the article and she said, you should really end with something happier. And I said, it's not a happy article. And I told her, maybe in one of my follow-ups, it'll be about, how to be better than the average. Because I talked a lot about median and mean wages and costs. And it's like, well, can you live a life that's a little cheaper? Can you find a way to increase your wages? And I've written similar articles before, saving about how to save money, how to live, beneath your means. But ultimately, you need to become part of the capital class. You need to become an investor. Otherwise, I think you're just going to have, an endless struggle and frustration.
I think we can look at the last, since the Great Recession, the wealth class versus the wage class, vastly different experiences, right? If you had wealth, it grew dramatically, right? If you had wages, it grew a little bit. Big difference. And so you have to find a way to be living below your means so that you can have some creation of wealth over time.
Right, and we've talked about this on other episodes.
Not easy to do. It's easier said than done.
Not easy to do, but you're making choices. And if you're deciding to go to college, are you going to a college that's going to result in a vocation, a job, or are you just going to college? Are you going to do 2 years at community college, or are you going to take out $60,000 loans and study sociology? So these are decisions that are important.
The debate about the value of a liberal arts education is another topic for another day, but I follow your point.
I meant it as an example, not I
totally got your point. It's a valid one. Thought-provoking stuff. If you want to learn more about this, head to our webpage. You can read Brian's full article, Why the Economic Vibes Are Off. If nothing else, you can go to somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com to find our webpage. Or you can go to wealthenhancement.com/AMR. And if we can be a help to you as you're trying to navigate your financial planning and portfolio management, whether for you or for your family members, don't hesitate to reach out to our team. Until next time, keep striving for something more.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's for financial planning or portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901. Or send us your questions to amr-info@wealthenhancement.com. You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd Financial Talk Show. Wealth Enhancement Advisory Services and J. Christopher Boyd provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. Wealth Enhancement Group cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.